Hello everyone, I'm Mike, NI2S, November India 2 Sierra. I'm going to make a video of talking about some of the specifics of this Comrod TM128 mast system, also known by its military version numbers, which is AB-1339AG, if I recall correctly. Alpha Bravo 1339 Alpha/Golf is the military designation for this mast. It's a telescoping mast, and it telescopes out to roughly 40 feet, if I recall correctly. I don't have the specs, but you have the model numbers, and you can certainly look them up online for the exact height specs on it. In any event, we received an inquiry from Ham out of Atlanta, who has a similar mast, who was asking about our winch system. So we're going to start by talking about that. I'm also going to go into a little detail on some of the other arrangements that I've worked out relative to the use of this mast, in case anybody's interested. Maybe you're thinking about buying one of these, or you're just curious about how it works. Either way, we'll go into a little bit of detail in terms of our use and how we configured this mast with the electric winch. So I guess we'll start by talking about that winch arrangement and how we configured it. And the first thing to note here is that this is an inexpensive winch that I bought off of Amazon, and I will post a link to a unit that I purchased. Don't remember the name, the brand name, but it's not a brand name that I was ever familiar with. It certainly isn't Warren. I think everybody knows, Warren, one of the top manufacturers for winches. This is definitely not that. A manufacturer starts with an N, I think. It's basically a Chinese brand winch, and it was not expensive at all. If I recall correctly, and the link will keep me honest, I think it was around $65 for this winch, so not terribly expensive. It is rated at 1,500 pounds, which I deemed ample power for a mast of this kind. We are using this mast in conjunction with a spider beam, a tri-band spider beam. So it's not carrying a heavy load. Besides the spider beam, it carries a rotor. This is actually a Penninger aluminum mast system that I tried before I bought the telescoping mast, and I found that this was just a little too manpower intensive to raise even the spider beam from a horizontal to a vertical position for its full height of roughly 30 feet, 33 feet, something like that. So continued looking for a better system, and I tripped across the Comrod mast and decided to take the plunge and buy it. However, that's the storage place, if you will, for the rotor that I use at the top of this mast. So when that rotor's not in use, it sits here sitting pretty, and actually this is the mounting system for that spider beam antenna. So this is where it normally sits in my one-car garage when I'm not using the spider beam arrangement. So back to the winch. The winch is powered by 12-volt battery, which I've already got connected up just to, I'm going to give it a couple of toots, but we're not going to fully deploy the mast or anything like that, just so that you can see the operation, and also to show you how I take the winch on and off. I'm going to have to relieve the tension a little bit on the cable, and so in order to do that, I hooked up the battery. That battery is nothing special. It is a deep cycle gel cell marine battery, and the reason I'm using it is simply because I had it lying around. And it's not because you have to have a deep cycle gel cell battery to operate this winch with this mast. As I said, it was just on hand, and in fact that battery is probably 3/4 dead at this point. It only holds about 10% of its full charge at this point, so it's ready for recycling. But it does do enough of a job with a quick recharge to get this mast up and down. So So anyway, again, nothing special with the battery, just noting that it's 12 volts. One of these days I'll hook up some clamps for easy on, easy off. Excuse me. That is how it comes out of the box, so to speak, the winch that is. The winch also comes with a controller, which is right here for up down, and it's pretty obvious what's up and what's down. So the trick is you hook up the winch, you're standing at the mast, and while you have other helpers standing at the four corners with the guy ropes, you're standing at the base of the antenna operating the winch, sending it up and sending it down. I think our video is of it coming down in real time. I don't remember the exact timing, but it's certainly, I believe, well less than 3 minutes from its fully deployed state to its retracted state, and vice versa for when you're deploying it. No difference in speed, whether it's going up or whether it's going down. So let's talk about my mount for this winch. And everything basically here is improvised. I had these backing plates lying around. There are 2 of them, and what I've done is I've built a sandwich of the 2 backing plates, and on the bottom plate I cut 2 keyholes because there are 2 pins in the mast where the original OEM hand winch went or goes, and I cut 2 keyholes for those 2 pins that are already in the mast and use them to mount this plate onto the mast, and then the winch itself is bolted to the second backing plate, and then the 2 are sandwiched together with bolts and nuts as spacers in between. So let me show you how it comes on and off. But actually, before I do that, I just want to point out that in order for this winch configuration to work, the way that the mast comes from OEM factory, there's a, I believe it's a lead stop at the very end of the cable. This cable is the mast cable. It is not the cable that came with the winch. I have removed the cable that came with the winch and set it aside. So I'm using the cable that came with the mast, but I had to cut the stop end off. There's a little, round leaded end on it that would slide into this part for safekeeping. So when the mast was in storage, you would take that cable with the end on it and put the end in here, tension it that way to keep everything nice and tight and neat. I had to cut that end off in order to get this cable through this spool. It's the only solution that I could come up with. There may be other solutions out there that somebody who's watching this video knows about, and if you do know of an alternate solution so you don't have to cut the end off this mast, cut the end off the cable, then please post in the comments. I'd be interested in hearing it myself, even though the deed is done. So this is also why I keep this winch on the mast. As I've said, it's an inexpensive winch. Did I say winch? It's an inexpensive winch. So I'm not heartbroken that it's pretty much fixed to the mast, and I don't have a ton of use for this kind of winch outside of this mast system, so I'm happy to leave it here. But that's one of the drawbacks of this configuration, is removing that cable from this winch spool each time you want to use the mast is a bit on the impractical side. So I personally have decided to just leave the winch as it is and now consider it part of the mast. So the way that this works, the keyholes are configured, and you'll see this in a second, in such a way so that when there's tension on the cable, these plates are being pulled up into the pins so that these plates cannot pop off. It's just not possible. And you'll see why in a second. Let me first take a little bit of tension off this winch. And it doesn't need much. A little bit of electrical connection problem there. And is that loose enough? Yep, I think it is. Now we need to do a little love tap with a hammer. Let's see if that hammer nearby. And just, where's it the other way? Yeah, it's the other way. Okay. So now that it's unseated from that keyhole arrangement, let's see if I can pop this off one-handed. I'm going to need two hands. I'm going to stop the video recorder. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So I've got the winch off the mast, and now you can see the keyholes that I cut. This one I didn't do too bad a job on. This one, not quite so pretty, but I just did it with your basic tools, a screwdriver, and I think I used a Dremel tool to cut those keyways. So you start out with putting these two pins obviously through the larger hole, and then when you put tension on the wire rope, it pulls them into the keyways and keeps the backing plate secure so it doesn't move. And indeed, as you saw me trying to get this off, it doesn't. So there's no bolting, there's no strapping, it's just the laws of physics that are holding this winch in place. Now let me see if I can put this back on one-handed, just to demonstrate that for you. Okay, it's back on. And I need both hands to get that wire rope reconfigured so it's laying properly on the spool. I got to turn the video off again. Just a second, I'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and now we've got the wire positioned correctly, the wire rope I should say, and now we're going to just put a little bit of tension on the winch so that the cable isn't loose, and here we go. And I think you'll see the winch kind of shift and seat fully into those keyholes. And there it goes. I think you saw a little bit of movement there, and so that's the way that the winch normally sits. When I deploy the mast, and I'll show this to you for those of you who are not familiar with this kind of mast, normally this is of course the top of the mast, and normally the mast is locked closed with this short cable and this locking mechanism here and this S brain freeze, that S-shaped clamp. So in order to release the top mast mechanism so that it can deploy, you pull this pin out and then you pull up on this lever and pull it all the way forward, and that leaves you with enough slack to take this out, and then pull that through the ring, and you would put the pin back in because you definitely do not want to lose that pin for future use, and that's how you would set the mast in its ready to deploy state. There are 3 levels on this mast that require guying. The bottom level is this ring where 4 guys go on that, and then 4 guys go on this plate, which also spins, And then lastly, 4 guys will go on the very top plate up on the business end where the rotor mounts. You will see that that's pretty stubby from standpoint of a top mount, but so it won't fit or seat fully in your average rotor clamp mount, but I have not had any problems over the last 2 years with that. We just tightened the bolts securely around that top part, and we have not had any issues with the antenna. Of course, a spider beam is a very light load antenna, so I can't speak to how that would work for a larger antenna array that's got more load on it. Excuse me. But that's what we do, and so far we haven't had any problems using that rotor on this mast. So let me put this back because we don't want to have any accidents. You also, of course, always want to transport this mast with this lock in place so that you don't have any accidental deployments. That would be probably a very bad thing. Okay, so a few other things to note, I guess, on this mast. First, I purchased this mast off a dealer from eBay, and the mast came only with the mounting plate, the ground mounting plate. Did not come with the winch, which I think the manual winch, which I think you've figured out by now. Could not find the manual winch anywhere. And that led me to, what do I do as an alternative? I actually talked to the guy I bought this from and asked him, since he was a military surplus dealer and laid claim to having sold several of these masts. And he said, you know, use any kind of mechanical winch. There are many different types available for trailers, boat trailers, whatever. And he was right. There's lots of different mechanical winches that you can buy. And looking at that, the guy that I was talking to who sold me this mast also said, hey, you know, you could also configure it for an electric winch if you're ambitious enough. And I was ambitious enough, so I figured since I was going to have to do something aftermarket anyway, might as well go electric just to ease and speed the raising of this mast. So that's what I did, and you see the results right there. Trying to think if there's anything else that's worth mentioning as far as the winch goes. I guess the only thing else that's worth mentioning as far as that winch goes is that, and I think you'll see this in the comments if you look on the on Amazon for this particular winch. When it runs, it's loud. And possibly even louder because of the effects of this being mounted onto this aluminum mast, where maybe it acts as an amplifier of sorts. But when you're standing at the foot of this mast and you're running this winch to raise it or to lower it, it's loud enough to the point where your helpers you're either going to have them on radios so that you can hear what they're saying, or they're going to have to shout at you to overcome the noise of this winch. It's loud enough that certainly they will have to raise their voices in order for you to hear what they're saying, and of course from a safety standpoint, that's very important. So consider that if you buy this exact winch to run a mast of this type or model to raise and lower it. So anyway, in terms of just general operation and raising, excuse me, I have an allergy-borne cough, so apologize for that. But as far as the base plate goes, a couple of things worth noting. First, if you see that there are 2 tabs with holes on the mast, and there are 2 small lengths of basically what this is chain. And what you do when you're getting ready to mount the mast is you get a pin, which also didn't come with the mast, and I just bought a piece of steel from Home Depot that happened to fit. And you run the pin through both ends and through these 2 chains in order to secure the mast to the base. Now, The base then gets staked to the ground so that when you're lifting this from its current horizontal position into the vertical position, that the base doesn't shift on you. So you then basically use that as a hinge, if you will, when raising the antenna at its initial height in its lowest setting. And this will turn up so that if you can envision this thing is standing up in its vertical situation, that's how the antenna will sit. The little ball goes in the center and the antenna sits like so. Now, why do you need the pin? Well, interesting question. The reason, there are two reasons for the use of the pin in order to secure the base plate to the antenna. One is, as I just said, for mounting, so that when you're tilting this thing up into its vertical stance, the base plate doesn't shift on you. And the other reason is because this entire mast rotates. So we use a rotor, as you've already heard. However, let's say the rotor failed. Murphy's Law, right? It's field day, and you're up there and you're trying to turn the rotor, and the rotor eats itself and all the gears bust inside the rotor and you can't rotate your antenna anymore. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Well, in this particular case, this mast is designed to rotate on that base. So when you wanted to rotate it, you would, and of course it's standing in the vertical position, it's deployed, you would take the pin out, decouple it from the base, and then you can turn this entire mast. These guy mounting points, you may have noticed, I demonstrated them before, they all, well now it's locked in place, but they all turn. So the entire mast can rotate, and so that is a great, what I consider an emergency alternative system if your rotator fails, or if you're reluctant to put a rotator on the top end of that because that stub is so short and you want to just use the entire mast to rotate, you can do that. You've got the option to do that. Typically, for the last 2 years when I've deployed this, I've only staked it out diagonally on 2 holes because really the object is that you don't want it to move when you're mounting. And of course you don't want it to move once it's deployed, but with the guys and all of that, the likelihood of that happening is pretty slim. But certainly I would recommend that you use at least 2 of the 4 holes to secure the plate to the ground. I don't use special stakes for this. I just use, you know, your average metal camping stakes, probably a 1/4 inch diameter or 3/8 inch diameter, something like that. I use much heavier stakes for the guys, and I'll show you them in a second. But again, it's primarily just to keep that plate from shifting around, so I don't think that you really need you know, something heavy duty here. I could be wrong. It's just one man's opinion. I haven't had a problem, but that doesn't mean, that could just mean that, like the old saying goes, God smiles on fools and small children. Since I'm not a small child, maybe I'm a fool, and I've just been lucky these last 2 years, but I'm just sharing with you what I've done myself. In terms of raising the mast from its horizontal to vertical position, it's very important to get the mast plumb at its lowest stage. So your guy ropes for the lowest stage attach here. This does not go up with the deployment of the mast. This stays in its current position, so it's a fixed ring even though it rotates, and this is the lowest point for the first set of guys, and you put your 4 guys on here equally spaced, of course, and then what I do is I take a level and I use that level, it's a 2-foot level, to plumb the mast so that we can get it as straight as possible before we deploy the mast to its full height. That's very important because, as you know, if it's not plumb at its lowest level, as you raise this mast up to its full height, however far you're off will be exaggerated at the top of the mast. So Spend the time, don't rush it. Make sure that you're as close to plumb as you can humanly be before you start playing around with raising the mast to its full height. So once you've done that, once you've got your guys tensioned, then when you're ready, what I do, and this is my own recommendation because I think it facilitates the end result best and also safely, is that I raise the mast without a load on it first in order to dial in the guys so that they're all tensioned properly. The mast is reasonably straight to the eye and to the level. After I raise the mast to its full height, I go back and I recheck everything with the level to make sure nothing's moved. If there's any fine tuning that needs to be done to the mast, we'll do that. And then once we're satisfied with the basic deployment without a load, we will then lower the mast again to its minimum height and then take our little giant ladder, which I've got here, and climb up the ladder with our antenna, our spider beam antenna, and then, and only then, drop the load on the top of the mast and prepare it for deployment. Then, of course, once our trusty rotor and mast system, or antenna system rather, is properly installed on the top of the mast and it's oriented properly in terms of compass headings, then we will re-raise the mast, and by the time we get to the top of the deployment of the mast, the guys essentially will self-tension, and we don't need to run around like chickens with our heads cut off tensioning guy ropes with the antenna load on it for fear that it's going to tip over. So like I said, personally I think that works very well. I think it's a very safe approach, even if it's an extra step, and I would recommend going that route. You're free to do whatever it is that you're comfortable with. I'm not an expert. I'm also not an engineer. So if you have differing ideas, that's on you to experiment with your own deployment strategies to your heart's content. The other thing I would share with you is my guy system, because the guy system also did not come with the mast, and I don't know if Comrod would sell them to me. I didn't inquire, but the guy system that comes normally with the mast from the OEM has tensioners. I'd love to have them if I could get a set, but I was fearful, since this was not cheap, that they were going to cost me a lot of money, so I developed my own guy system using low stretch rope. And so I bought a big spool of low stretch rope like this. This is my case where I keep all of the supplies, including the base plate for the antenna. I keep it in this case so it's all grab and go. And what I've done is, on one end I put a stainless steel spring, come on spring loaded carabiner, so we can slap it on the guy points, just for demonstration purposes, like so, and easy on, easy off. So, and also that means that I don't have to do anything with resizing guys from one year to the next and so on. So this is a permanent arrangement. There are three sets of 4 guys each at 3 different lengths. I don't have the lengths of the guys written down, but obviously because there are 3 different sections on the mast, there'll be 3 lengths of guy ropes. And what I've done is, on the other end, I didn't have tensioners, so I went online and I looked for tensioner type knots. I found one online and used the online instructions that I found on the interweb for tensioning with a knot, and guess what? It works pretty damn good. I haven't had any problems with the guys coming loose for 2016 or 2017. 2017 field day was pretty windy, especially on Sunday, and did not have a problem with those guys or that tensioner knot working its way loose. I would like a little bit of a better arrangement, but so far it hasn't caused any problems whatsoever. So as I said, I've got 3 sets of 4 guys, and obviously we as I've said, we put the lower set of guys up, and we raise the mast, and then we put the other 2 sets of guys up, and we put the stakes in the ground, and the stakes are here. These are much heavier stakes than what I was talking about for the base. Or so I use just crap camping type stakes that I've got laying around. These are not crap camping type stakes. They are 5/8 inch steel, and bought them for this purpose, and they work extremely well. We usually drive them in the ground about 3 to 4 inches to the neck, and loop the guy rope around, and for the outer guys, the midsection of the mast and the top section, those guys secure to the same stake. If you look at the instructions, they both go to the same stake, and the inner ring with the lowest the lowest section of the mast with the guys, those guys go on a separate set of 4 stakes, and I believe, if I recall correctly, the lowest guys, the stakes go in the ground at, I think it's 26 feet away from the mast, and the middle section and the top section, as I said, go on the same one stake, which I believe goes in the ground, and I think it's 46 feet away from the mast. And the way that we configure those stakes is we go off the diagonals of the mounting plate in those 4 directions, as carefully symmetrical as we can get it, and we literally put a measuring tape out and we measure out the distance. In that respect, I figure the engineers knew what they were doing when they designed those specifications, so I'm not going to judge in that respect, and I'm going to follow their recommendations. So that's what we do in terms of guying down the mast. And as I said before, just to emphasize it, we put the mast up first without the load, tension all the guys, all 12 of them, to make sure everything's tight, make sure that the mast is as plumb as human beings can make it for a temporary situation, and then we lower the mast again, and then we scoot up the ladder and install the load on the top of the mast. And then once the load is secured to the top of the mast, the antenna that is, the guys tension, and then we're done. One good look around, make sure everything still looks good, and we're off to the airwaves after that. I think that's pretty much it. Is there anything else that I can think of? I can say to you that I like this mast. Field day is a bit of a sickness for me. I started my first field day at the age of 7. My father was a ham. His call was K2AJV. And he brought me to my first field day with the Livingston Amateur Radio Club, now long defunct. And I was totally blown away by the whole operation, and that hooked me into ham radio, actually. And so I've been participating either as a gopher or as an operator. I got my ticket in my teens ever since. So from the age of 7 to 2017, I participated in one way or another in every single field day year after year, for a total of 49 field days. So next year is the big 5-0. And God willing, if I'm still around, maybe we'll throw a big bash to celebrate. So that's it, basically. I will, one more disclaimer, I just have to say it. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi says, so who's the greater fool, the fool or the fool that follows them? I'm not an engineer. This is a solution that I came up with on my own, just based on, mechanical ability. Whether that's good or bad is for you to judge, and make no assurance or warranty that this arrangement will work for you. You've got to use your own good judgment. If you have better ideas, I'm all ears. Usually, a community can come up with the ultimate solution a lot better than one individual. So if you've got constructive comments, I would love to hear them. But at the end of the day, if you are going to retrofit the TM128 for an electric winch, then you do so at your own risk. So now that we got all the legal stuff out of the way, I hope you found this short video useful and informative. And if this drives any questions that I may not have covered, then just either shoot us a note or put comments in the comment section. And I guess that's it. So 73, everybody, have good DX and enjoy your next field day. Bye now.